The Pin Drop podcast brings you the most intrepid chat on the podsphere. Interesting people sharing their personal formula for success, stories of personal growth, people confessing their fears and what they have learned from going to the edge. Hosted by me, Vicky Anstey, founder of We Are Intrepid. We Are Intrepid is a personal growth philosophy and an adventure experience company. Our sole purpose is to show you how to experience the truly life-enhancing effects of advantage through adversity, to understand how our fears and emotions work, and how to unlock the huge potential we all have to lead a more fulfilling and rewarding life. And maybe for you, that starts with listening to this.
David Silver, thank you for coming on the Pin Drop podcast for We Are Intrepid. Really excited to speak to you today. We've recently become reconnected, which is a great thing after knowing each other for many years and having worked together over a period of time. I'm going to introduce you briefly, and then I can start asking you all the soul-searching questions in relation to what this podcast is about. But essentially, you are a physiotherapist with extensive experience. So I have in my notes that you've conducted over 20,000 private physiotherapy and wellness consultations over the years. That's a lot. Do you keep a running tally?
No, fortunately not. No, the staff let me know.
Okay.
It seems like an awful lot.
It does. But,
yeah.
You're a busy man, so no doubt. We first met each other through our shared passion for movement when I ran my bar studio, Barworks, and you were working at the Forge Clinic, which was sort of literally over the road. And I believe that was your first introduction to bar. And you became quite the fan, quite the advocate in your clinic, which was fantastic for us because we got lots of referrals from you. And then over the years, we worked together quite extensively, didn't we, to develop programs for rehabilitation through bar. And, I now train people, instructors, how to use rehabilitative techniques in their bar classes. But the thing that really fascinated me, David, over all of our exchanges and all the time that we spent together was all of the information and knowledge that you gave me about our mentality to pain and how we can overcome barriers to movement with a better understanding of how our brains process discomfort and alert us to danger. And not all of it should we, in fact, or do we need to listen to. And a lot of that was incredibly helpful for me as I embarked upon my journey around that time, getting into doing the types of adventures that people perhaps know me for a little bit now. Certainly around that time, I was getting ready to do SAS Who Dares Wins. And, understanding even just a little bit about how my brain would respond to pain and fear and discomfort, and having that information in order to be able to perhaps override that was hugely helpful to me. So thank you very much. I might also add that you have just completed a neuroscience PhD, which is not just a sort of an addendum. It's, I think, as I understand it, become your life over the recent times. And you do lots of work presenting to various businesses, don't you, on the corporate circuit on your research into pain and neuroscience. So
absolutely.
Certainly I am speaking to the expert.
It's quite an intro. Backing it up, it's going to be a little bit difficult.
Well, hopefully you can follow it up with some interesting conversation.
Yes.
Yeah. So, tell me in your own words then, David, rather than mine, about your background and, your work life, personal life in relation to what this podcast is all about, which is, of course, trying to encourage people to embrace personal growth, step out of their comfort zone, challenge themselves in ways that they perhaps didn't think they could. How has your work and your life allowed you to do that?
Well, in so many ways, really. I feel very fortunate that I've stumbled across a role that allows me to be around so many different people and take so much from them. And you talk about pain. It's something that all of those people, the vast majority, have in common.
Yeah.
And so it quickly became something that I was fascinated about and wanted to share that. And when we first met, it was really under the auspices that I wanted to provide the patients that I would see on a regular basis with the means to continue their wellness and lifestyle changes journey, which I just didn't have the scope to do. I act largely as a consultant. I don't have the capability to do that much rehabilitation in-house. And patients would come to me and say, what do you think about Pilates? And what do you think about, yoga? And what do you think about so many different options? And I really didn't have any particularly sound advice for them. And Barworks is one of the things that just kept cropping up and up and up and up. And I thought, well, I've never heard of this. Maybe I should go down and see what's going on. And hence when we first met. Yeah. And like with so many other healthcare professionals and fitness professionals that I've worked with over the years, they all seem to have such a passion for movement and moreover people. And that's what's led me down my career path. And I feel so truly blessed to have stumbled across something that I love doing.
Yeah. Well, and it is, like you say, pain is a leveler, isn't it? We all experience it. Absolutely. We all experience discomfort at one time or other. It certainly affects every one of us. I think the thing that I really took from our work together, and without undermining the value of the course that I still to this day offer to bar professionals in rehab, it actually really just comes down to one thing fundamentally, which is your attitude and your kind of approach to dealing with that pain. And obviously every case is different, and in certain situations where there's acute pain, then that needs treating with. But often it's like a mental barrier, isn't it? And that's really what's kind of getting in the way.
Yeah, we kind of loosely group it into two categories. So you've got an acute pain onset, which I'm sure most people are familiar with, when you bang your toe or you've rolled your ankle or something where you get an acute onset. But also there's the pain that we all experience, well, I assume we all experience, because it is a very personal thing during exercise. And there is a very grey line that, our body and brain don't distinguish between the two that well. But essentially when we're exercising, it is pain. It's a stimulus to say, I'm not sure you should be doing this. Are you sure you want to push this hard? And that's something that we confront through our consciousness. So it is a complex process.
Yeah. What does your typical day look like, David? It sounds like it's fairly varied these days, and you're not just in clinic, are you? But
there isn't really a typical day, which I think is one of the things that I love about the job. There isn't any distinct routine. I'm clinic-based, treating anyone from professional amateur athletes all the way to desk-based individuals, to post-orthopedic management, to people with chronic pain, pediatrics, you name it. I'm a generalist in that regard. In Richmond on a Monday and Friday, I do mostly long-term sports rehab of an evening on a Wednesday. I've got my PhD work, which I'm finishing, and then I've obviously carried on doing a lot of other research bits and pieces, which are bolted onto that. And then wellness consultancy stuff, which I do in the corporate sector, and there is no one day. And even within those clinic days, that can be particularly varied. You just don't know what's going to come through the door. I have a whole caseload from a finger to an ankle to a psychosocial problem to someone who comes in, and we have long discussions about wellness. So it really is so varied, and that's what makes it so interesting.
And what would sort of the key differences between, let's say, an athlete that you might be treating and a member of the general public? What is there an attitudinal difference that is always striking, or can it just come down to the individual?
there are some attitude differences. Saying that, the amateur athletes that I work with have perhaps got even stronger mindsets in that regard, because they have to come in the challenges of getting up at 5 a.m. and then going and sitting behind a desk for 7 hours. So I think that you can't define it by being professional in that sense. But the characteristic, certainly with the endurance athletes that I've worked with, is that they are different. The research would suggest that they're exposed to more challenge when they're younger, in terms of their home life. That's not necessarily an abusive background, but it's certainly been exposed to more challenge. So they are confronting that on a more regular basis, because if you're going to have an existence involved around physical performance, it is suffering.
Yeah.
And
so they might have a level of grit and determination that perhaps others wouldn't have.
I would suggest that's probably fair to say.
Or they're just adapted to the fight a bit better.
In different ways. But the challenges that they face are in a physical context on a daily basis. And if you're going to be a high-level performing athlete, performing arts, a dancer, anything like that, you have to get up every day and know that you are going to be in physical discomfort. And some people are just not prepared for that. And I don't think the general public at large have a true understanding of the extent that athletes go through. They sit on a Saturday and an event, but they do not understand the level of suffering that goes.
Well, and also not just the level of suffering, but just tackling the mundane, right? That kind of repeat patterns and structures, and
it's got peaks of excitement, but largely it's about being utterly diligent, about being disciplined, and about looking after very small details. It's about sleep, about diet, nutrition, and not much else.
And do you think that then there is a certain person that is better accustomed to that, or do you think you can learn it as a skill?
I think there are inherent personality traits which I think would be very difficult to just foster. But saying that, I think that one of the things I've learned over the years is you can't underestimate people and the capability for them to adapt to certain circumstances. I think everyone has the potential for that in them, but many people have just not found themselves in a circumstance where perhaps they need that, or they're driven towards that. And perhaps athletes have just naturally gravitated towards that at a younger age through circumstance. So I'm mindful that, you can't read a book by the cover. And I think we all have huge untapped potential. And many people never realize that sometimes. And other people find it in true adversity. And there's people I work with who have unveiled levels of courage and determination through adversity, whether that's through considerable injuries or grief that they would never have thought possible. And that's a wonderful thing at times, and that's
and it's interesting you say that. And in fact, one of the early inspirations for setting up We're Intrepid was a conversation that I had with a lady who I just happened to meet out in the park walking my dogs, and she was just telling me about her situation. It was just really awful. Her husband had leukemia, and she was really struggling to look after him, and they were having to shield and all of this kind of stuff, really challenging times. And she said, though, and I think she had followed me on Instagram or something, so she obviously felt that I was an authority on the subject. But she said, I've found that I'm capable of far more than I would ever have given myself credit for. And I just thought, it's so awful. And of course, we all face these things in life at certain points to greater or lesser degrees. But it's so awful that you would have to go through a situation like that to discover that about yourself. So what if we could put things in place that you would already know that you have greater potential than perhaps you give yourself credit for? I find it really fascinating. I think we all have that in us.
Yeah, it's a paradox, isn't it? That we sometimes have to go there to tap into that.
Yeah.
It's like hindsight, isn't it? It's easy when people are confronted by their own mortality, whether it's through cancer or things like that, and they suddenly have huge changes to their lifestyles. I've often thought, well, maybe you could, the what ifs and what, maybe I'd have done this differently. But I truly feel that that's just how the dice roll, and how people respond to those situations, and trying to live your life with that level of consciousness is too challenging for most people.
It is.
And I'm very fortunate that what I get is a reality check literally every day from people who are in an, at times extremely challenging circumstance, and it puts huge perspective on my life. It's hard to sweat the small stuff when you've. I had a guy come in the other day, and we've been working with him post knee replacement for a period of time, and he said, "Dave, I might have to have a bit of a break because I've just been diagnosed with cancer." And you think, well, crikey, this guy's already struggling, he's had a series of falls, and then that comes up. But his bravery is inspiring to me. And so when I walk back in the door, there's bills to pay and there's chaos here, and then you go, well, do you know what? That's not that important.
Doesn't really matter.
That doesn't mean you're flippant with your life. But one of the things my career has given me so much is huge perspective on what's important.
And does that, or has that in the past, I think I know the answer to my own question, although I'd love to hear more about it, but how has that led you on to have your own adventures in life? Because you've undertaken a few
I suppose,
haven't you?
Yeah, I have. It's led me to a point where I find it very difficult to say no to anything. And well, let's put it this way. My default setting is yes, absolutely. And then I go, oh, maybe I can't do that, or maybe the time's not going to work. But my default setting for most things is just yes.
Yeah.
And because and I don't know whether this is born out of an appreciation of the sort of finality of life, but I'm conscious that we're not here for a long time, and therefore I don't want to miss out on anything. I really don't.
Yeah.
And I get more pleasure and joy out of being with people, not with elite level sports people anymore. Do you know what? It's strange to say this, but that's an ego thing. Oh, you've worked with so-and-so, and you work with so-and-so, and this actor and that sportsman, all the rest of it. It doesn't interest me in the slightest, because their performance gradients are so small. When I'm away with someone who has an incredible fear of heights, and they've just walked up a mountain, or they have overcome 13 rounds of chemo and they've just done an Everesting challenge on a bike, that's what inspires me. Yeah. And it's like absolute rocket fuel. I can't describe it. It really does.
And to what extent does your knowledge of brain function, neuroscience, etc., to what extent does that allow you to kind of override your instincts, that the instincts that we all have to quit potentially? I mean, I asked that with self-interest because I certainly remember going into SAS and having had a conversation with you and a couple of other people who were well positioned to know, kind of with an idea of what I was letting myself in for, and that there would be mental interrogation. But realistically, it's a TV program, so can you not just switch your brain off to what's happening and just think rationally? This is just a program that I'm going through. The reality was that was not no, and it was very, very real. And on
that same level, you could argue that perhaps the reality that we experience every day is some sort of fiction. You cannot switch yourself off to the context, particularly when you're put under physical and emotional stress. I think the primary tool is understanding how it works. There are a few sort of cognitive tricks that you can use, and over the last sort of 15 years, lots of sports psychologists, neuroscientists have come up with different ways in which you can assist the process. But nothing that I think is more powerful than understanding how our bodies work and our sensory system works. And I think with that in mind, it allows you to push to places that perhaps you couldn't go, not through accessing some sort of alternate reality, as you're sort of alluding to, which is one way, but just being more conscious in the circumstance. And that alludes very much to the sort of processes that a lot of people go through at the moment with mindfulness. Mindfulness is a in its current form, was a process developed by the US BMX team.
Was it?
Yeah,
Oh, I didn't know that.
Obviously mindfulness is, and the concepts of mindfulness in terms of meditation have been around for centuries.
Yeah.
In its current form, it was the US BMX team that came up with a program called MPEAK, under the auspices that if you're an athlete, the primary goal is, cognitively that is to stay in the present. As soon as you start considering what's out around the next bend, how you're going to finish,
or what happened,
what's happened before. So
past
and present thoughts are not conducive for strong performance.
Right.
So we were trying to stay in the present. So they built essentially mindfulness techniques. They coined the term mindfulness to try and ensure athletes were staying essentially in the moment. And so focusing on the controllables of their performance. And that's very much alludes to the sort of nature of pain in that sense, is that pain is not an input. It's not something that's coming from our tissues and projecting to our brain. It's the other way around.
Yeah.
It's that the information coming from our sensory system is non-discriminate. It is not a pain signal. We don't have a pain signal. It's just, this is the status of our body. And so our brain is making sense of what suitable output is correct at the time, not only built on that information, but the context. So when you're in a shipping container with people banging the sides and people screaming at you, and you're in Afghanistan, your brain is in a situation where the context is infinitely more grave than me sitting in my living room.
Yeah.
If we were both prodding ourselves with a biro in those different contexts, we're going to get a different sensory output because pain is extremely contextual. And the analogy that I use in the clinic all the time is, if you cross the road outside and you roll your ankle and there's a car coming, it will not be painful.
Yeah. Well,
because
some people would say pain doesn't exist. I've heard that phrase used.
Well, I mean, I suppose we're looking at semantics of the description of what exists means. We're getting quite philosophical now.
Yeah.
It is not a tangible. I think you could probably state that. It is a feeling, just like any other physical
emotion.
Feeling.
Yeah.
And unfortunately for some people, what tends to happen is it gets a bit blurred. So whereas it might be quite discriminate when it's working well, for people that have had chronic pain or emotional distress, it gets blurred. So what might have been a 1 out of 10, well, this isn't so much of a problem, becomes a 6 or a 7 out of 10 because the rest of their nervous system is super sensitized, or they're under extreme pressure. So if you're in a situation where you think the stakes are extremely high or your life is in danger, we might well get very different responses to situations.
And is that blurring down to, like you said, obviously the context, but that there may be emotional pain present as well, that all becomes intermingled? Absolutely.
So in terms of your subconscious, if emotionality, it ramps up the volume of our nervous system. So if we're in a state of high stress, or we've got emotional pain, how do you define emotional pain? Emotional pain, according to a large swathe of psychologists, is a physical manifestation. It's both cognitive and physical. And so you can't really separate the two. They're interwoven. And also our past experiences play a huge role on whether our brain thinks it's suitable to give us pain. I worked with a fellow recently who'd seen a whole host of different therapists and really got nowhere. Had raging knee pain, was on crutches, hobbling in. And there was no physical explanation for his pain. He'd had MRI scans, x-rays, a whole host of things, and no one could get to the bottom of it. And we started to talk, and I suppose I go a little bit deeper than most therapists in this regard. And I asked him about his family background and upbringing. And I said, was there anyone else in your family who'd experienced, pain? And his face just dropped. And before telling me anything, he just burst into tears. And he said, my father was a refugee from the Eritrean War and had shrapnel in his leg. And he carried the shrapnel for most of his life, and he complained of being in pain every day of his life. So as a boy, I never
that's what he'd grown up with.
Hobble around. And so his perceptions of the risk, the damage, and the consequence. Now, undoubtedly, his father, with that shrapnel, both carried the physical scars and the emotional scars of coming from a war zone.
Of course.
And that was then, like any form of trauma, tumbled downhill through the family generation to him. So when he developed a knee pain, it wasn't a 2 out of 10, it was a 7 out of 10, because this is going to have a dramatic effect on my life.
How fascinating.
So once we broke down those barriers and he started to understand more about the neuroscience of pain, literally within a week, he said, it's 50% better, David. You know, he just could not believe it.
That's so interesting. I mean, a little bit
rewarding from my perspective.
Yeah, you learn so much about how humans work. I mean, it sounds a little bit, you know, the same as the way that that fear works. You know, you can inherit fears from others, can't you? You can absorb those from.
You could inherit the cognitive disposition for forward catastrophizing.
Right.
That you can, because that's both a sociological trait and a biological trait. Like most things, there's nature and nurture. But if you lived in a family where there was a sort of what I would call high worry, high anxiety, that's essentially a process of thinking about the future. Fear is only, I mean, the social psychology.
Fear of the unknown.
Fear is only a process of the future. In the present, I chatted to a patient about this the other day. We were talking about fear, and I said, if there was a lion in the room with us now, we would both be terrified, wouldn't we? He said, yeah, I'd be absolutely terrified. But we're terrified about what could happen. We're terrified about being mauled to death by a lion.
Or our knowledge of what has gone before.
Absolutely, our perceptions of what could happen. But the lion's just as ready to turn over and we tickle its tummy.
Yeah. Well, that's why they say, going back to what you were saying about mindfulness, that mindfulness is a great remedy for fear, because when you are truly present, you can't fear what was in the past or what may lie in the future.
There's no projection. And I worked with a preeminent sports psychologist when I did my one of my undergrad degrees, and I couldn't get my head around this at the time. I really couldn't. He suggested that anxiety is an equation, and it's the sort of maths equation of overestimating the problem divided by underestimating our resources and thinking we've got to get the solution instantly.
Right.
And I mulled over this for months and months and months, and I thought, you know what? That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, how brilliant.
The time aspect can ramp it up. I've got to go sort this out. Catastrophizing is something that we're all biologically programmed to do. It's a good survival tactic. The what ifs? Can I head off the what ifs? That's got, some people have it more than others, but if you don't have that, that's not biologically very safe. You need to be cautious about the future. What most of us can improve is underestimating our own resources. Yeah. And whether that's your own personal resources or the people around you, or I mean, I said this to my wife the other day, you could get positive reinforcement 1,000 times, but we all remember the one time it went bang.
Yeah, we do. That's how our brains are hardwired that way, aren't they? To have that kind of negative.
The probabilities are.
So if you were going to, given all your knowledge and you know your background, David, if you were going to give somebody advice on how to kind of grit through a situation that you know they're in, you know, of their own choice and making, that might be, you know, ultimately a physically demanding situation, how are there some techniques or strategies that you would advise that could be useful to kind of get through and to unlock the untapped potential that we have in us?
There are many, and I think, like so many things, it's about experimenting with what works for you. For me personally, the thing that has had such a dramatic positive influence when I am in, you know, at my perceived limits is smiling. There's nothing more powerful than a smile.
Right, creating an illusion for yourself.
I mean, how powerful you create that is what we understand is that positive thoughts reduce our ratings of perceived exertion exponentially. And I mean, if you think about people like Kipchoge, he does huge amounts of. Recent research suggested that if you train under emotional stress, ratings of perceived exertion, how hard it feels to exercise, goes up when we're emotionally stressed. Right. So if you train in that state and then compete when you are absolutely buzzing and joyful and you have a smile across your face, then our ratings of perceived exertion go down dramatically. And that's one key way that we can push closer towards our physiological limits. And so what I do is I picture my daughter when she was 3 hanging around my neck and screaming, "Come on, Daddy." And, you know, and just it brings a smile. And I picture amazing places that I've been. And it's just such a powerful thing. It might not work for everyone, but to me, that is, there's nothing that competes with that.
Yeah. Positivity.
It is. It's utter positivity.
Yeah, an outlook. Yeah, an attitude. And
if you look at the elite level athletes of the world, is that they all have you can't run on fear. You can't run on fear of failure because it is a negative emotion, and that negative emotion is one that takes so much energy. And if you are trying to drive all your energy into physical performance, having emotional energy lost through worrying, it's not going to help. It really isn't.
And what techniques would you use yourself or advise for others to kind of really get into that flow, that mindfulness, that present, you know, being truly present and focused?
I think one of the key ways is to ensure that you feel that you've ticked off what you can control. It's controlling the controllables. Yeah. So if I've done all my training, I've done all my rehab, I've followed my coaching plan, I've done everything, I've done what I can do, there is no stone left unturned, then I'm fully prepared. Yeah. And if you go into it with that mindset, it's done.
Well, I think that mindset also allows you to relax a little bit, doesn't it? And
Absolutely.
the knowledge that, well,
that
everything else is out of your hands. So,
And what creates a difficulty for endurance athletes, particularly in this field, or well, not just endurance athletes, anyone really, is so much that we've had a perception for many years, certainly in the last sort of 2 decades, that the harder you push, the physically more demanding the activity that you engage in terms of training, the better you'll be. And what we've now started to understand is that probably leads to huge amounts of overtraining. Now, if you're an athlete and you're lining up against someone else and you think, well, they've trained more than me, I haven't done the work, I haven't done this, that, and the other, that's going to lead to poor performance. So it's a very fine balance to say, right, well, I've pushed as hard as I can, but I haven't overdone it. I've known when to back off.
Yeah. Well, and I think you also allude to something really important there, which is not to compare yourself to others.
Yeah. For sure.
You know, I know that can be super draining. So you really have to focus on your own path, don't you? And what you're, as you say, able to control.
Absolutely. Yeah. And being consistent, you know. Consistently leads to success so much.
And I mean, we could go on forever, couldn't we? You know, it's again going back to what you'd said earlier about dealing with the boring, mundane tasks that you know, that kind of attitude is what unites successful athletes, military personnel. They're good at doing the really boring basics.
It's discipline.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You know what? It sounds simple, but it's really tough. You know, I remember I read David Miller's book, and it's fascinating. And he talks about little wins, and I didn't have a Mars bar, and that was a little win. You know, and that sums up the life of an athlete, doesn't it? It's those micro decisions. Yeah. And I think that, I mean, they are the thing that make the difference. It's who's prepared to challenge themselves more.
Yeah, and how much you want it and why you want it as well. All of those things are vital.
Can you live in that world and be happy?
Tell me, David, what did you want to be when you were a kid? Did you always know that you were going to be in this field of work, or what would you have been if you weren't a physiotherapist and an expert on pain and neuroscience?
Yeah, it's I've been thinking about this a lot, actually. I had absolutely no thoughts of becoming a physio when I was younger, largely because I assumed I didn't have anywhere near the capability to do it. Right. I really struggled at school with dyslexia. I couldn't really write my own name till I was about 10, 11.
Right.
Special needs, the full works. I scraped some GCSEs, scraped some A levels. And I thought, well, there's no way. You know, physio, you need a couple of B's and something to get that, and I just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So, fortunately, I was playing rugby at the time, and the club I was with had a scholarship program with the university, and so I sort of blagged my way onto a sports science degree, and I just loved it. It was just all of a sudden there was something that I had a passion for. I enjoyed doing. They helped me find ways of learning which was suitable to me.
Yeah.
I realised quite quickly I can't sit, write, listen, and write down. I mean, people were writing notes and notes and notes. Couldn't do it. So I just sit. I'm sure they thought I wasn't paying attention.
And you were just listening. Yeah.
Couldn't do it. So I love that, and I got to the back end of it, and I thought, you know what, I don't want this to be the end. You know, this can't be the end. And there certainly wasn't a career path that really opened itself out. And at the time, I was doing some PT work, and I was still working in the sort of fitness industry. But that, I didn't really know where to take that. And so I applied through clearing for a physiotherapy slot at St George's, and thought, well, there's no chance I'm going to get in. And I managed to get an interview. They had 300 people for 3 places in clearing, and I blagged it.
Wow!
I literally blagged it.
Good for you.
So
would you have done anything? Would you have done anything else? You didn't when you were a kid? Did you have a burning ambition to do something, to be a postman?
If I wasn't being a physio, I probably would have tried to do teaching or something in strength conditioning, something like that.
Yeah.
I can't imagine. My mother has always said I could never work for anyone else. I don't know if that was I don't know if that was a slight on me or not. I'm fairly single-minded in that regard.
Yeah.
But I'd love working with people. The thought of sitting at a computer doing something or being isolated is
not your thing.
I could do it.
Yeah. And what, so kind of going back to like a more, well, it doesn't necessarily have to relate to adventure exactly, but what would you say has been your sketchiest moment in life so far? Have you ever really sort of taken yourself to the edge?
Well, yeah, I mean, I had an incident. I completed the Marmotte des Alpes, which is a one-day cycle event in France, 2019, and extremely hot day. And me and a crew, we'd done it for a friend of ours who had motor neuron disease. And bit of training. I was riding reasonably frequently at the time, but it's quite a brutal ride, I have to say. And it was really hot. It was like 34, 35 degrees.
Wow. And
it's 170, I think it's 175K, 5,500 meters of climbing in the day. So it's quite a big day out. Got round it, took about 12 hours, and I wasn't feeling brilliant afterwards, but I don't think you're supposed to, really. And I'd really dug deep on the last bit and pushed quite hard. We did a load of charity bits and pieces afterwards, videos and photos and stuff, and I just didn't really get my food and nutrition right. So I went back to the hotel. I'd said to my wife, look, you go down and have a meal with everyone else, and I'll meet you down there in a bit. And that's when it all gets a bit hazy, really. I phoned her about 10:30 and said, look, I'm not feeling good. I think you need to get back here. By the time she got back, this is on the top of Alpe d'Huez, by the way. So I'm marching up and down the corridor in the hotel. Really nice hotel. I'm marching up and down the corridor. And at this point, I was convinced that I was going to die.
Oh, my God.
And she thought I was being a bit paranoid because I was still on my feet. I was marching around. So she said, look, I'll go to reception. They called for a French GP. French GP turned out, this is probably about sort of 11:30, didn't speak a word of English. I'm in the bed at this point, and I'm pumping my legs up and down because I felt that if I stopped moving, I was going to die. I was absolutely convinced I was dying. And he stuck an ECG on me and sent that through to Grenoble, a photo of it through to Grenoble, which is the closest ICU, which was miles away. And his demeanor changed quite rapidly because I didn't realize at the time I was in tachycardia. So they'd essentially said that we're going to send the air ambulance because, he's in a really bad way. He stuck a line in me because I said, look, get a line in me because, my assumption was that I was just essentially
dehydrated. Yeah.
Wasn't great. So he stuck a line in me and they couldn't get the air ambulance to land. So they sent a van. That took another hour. And at this point, I'm sort of just, it's a strange sensation, in and out of sort of lucidity, but with utter panic.
Right.
My wife was 7 months pregnant at the time.
Oh my
This is not
God.
good.
Oh no.
Two paramedics turn up. They put me in a chair and wheeled me down to it. And my last sort of recollection was being lied down in the ambulance, and they cut my top off, and they stuck the defib pads on. I remember looking up in the ambulance, seeing the defib pads on, going, "Oh my God, this is like game over." And I don't remember a thing after that. The lights out. And you know, it's interesting when you're unconscious, because it's not like sleeping where there's a perception of time passing. It was just like click, and then I was awake again. And I woke in a hospital. So, and obviously I've been in a fair few, so I know what I'm looking at. So I'm looking around. There was no one else. It was a sort of 3-bed ward, and I'm the only person in it. So I look up, and there's a sort of monitor up to my right, and there's sort of, you know, heart rate's like 130, sats are 89. I'm like, crack, they're not in a good way. And I was like,
that's me.
So I've got a line in each arm. I'm wired up to the nines. I've got a catheter in. I'm like, what the? I literally had no idea what had happened. So I'm lying in this bed. French nurse came in. She didn't speak much English. Then the consultant came in and said, you know, have you got any recollection of what happened? I said, look, I remember going in an ambulance, and that is it. He said, well, you went in the ambulance and you had a fit. You had a seizure for about 5 minutes, and they couldn't get a line into you to sedate you because you were flailing around quite a lot. You know, you were hypertonic. So they sedated me, and they sedated me for the whole journey to Grenoble. It was about an hour and a half. They then put me through a CT scan because they thought I'd had a pulmonary embolism, and then did an echocardiogram. Fortunately, that was all okay. And then they'd spent 16 hours pumping 6 litres of super strength saline through me because I was in hyponatremia. So my sodium levels were non-existent. I literally had no salt in me.
So you basically had pushed yourself too hard. Is this what we're saying?
In effect, yeah. And then I hadn't recovered suitably afterwards. So my sort of thought processes is that my physiology hadn't met my psychological capabilities.
Right.
So I'd allowed myself to push to those points. Now,
which is pretty much the reverse of what most people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I was psychologically more prepared than I was physiologically, which for most people is utterly the wrong way around.
Yeah.
I think it was the wrong way around because it nearly killed me.
Yeah.
So they did all this, and he said to me that 45 minutes and you would have been dead.
Wow.
Because what was happening is that the fluid which was in the cells of my brain, because of the low sodium, was being pulled out. So the fluid was filling the intracranial space and pushing my brain down. And that's what kills most people after endurance events. It's not being overly or dehydrated. It's being Coning pushes your brain down into your foramen magnum, which is the hole in which it comes from, and that switches off your breathing and your heart rate, and then you're gone.
Gosh, oh my God, David, lucky escape. Wow.
So yeah, I came round, and fortunately I was in reasonable nick at the time, because my average heart rate for 3 days solid was 145.
Jeez. And did it take you a long time to recover from that?
Yeah, it did. About 6 months, I'd say.
Wow.
I remember walking, apparently, a claim to fame here, I'm the only person to ever be discharged straight from Grenoble ICU. No step down ward, I walked straight out the doors. And I remember walking out the doors, and it was so bright that I literally I just couldn't. Jenny, my wife, had to lead me through Grenoble to a hotel because I couldn't open my eyes because the sun was so pounding. And obviously there's no fluid in my brain, you know, it was horrendous. Yeah. So they kept me there for a couple of days, and then I flew back. But yeah, it took about 6 months before I felt anywhere near, you know, normal. And I have to say, I haven't pushed myself to that level yet. I don't know how I'm going to feel when I do.
It's funny because often when I ask that question of people on this podcast, they're like, "Oh, I don't think I have yet reached my limits." I think that's quite compelling evidence.
Damn close to
probably
it.
is.
Yeah. That's as close as I'd like to get.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a funny one, isn't it? Because I don't know how I'll feel, you know, because the whole point is that you push hard, but when you've realised that when you know where the line is, that changes things.
Yeah.
But then who knows where the line is now, because this thing is not a constant, it's constantly moving. But what I do know is if you are fearful of going to that place, then you're not living.
Yeah. Well, it's a great dinner party story for sure, David.
Yeah, it's I've told it a few times. I've got the odd few drinks.
What would you say is your personal motto for life? What do you live by? What's your kind of?
I think I'm doing two things, because these things evolve over time. The one thing I'm trying to be is 100% accountable.
Okay.
And what that means for me in my life is that it's not a process where I try to be in control of everything. It's just that if a circumstance, I'll give you an example. I come in and me and the wife have a row. Well, I ask myself what I've done to prevent that. Have I done all I can, or what could I have done differently? I'm looking internally rather than waiting, blaming someone else.
Yeah.
Inanimate objects. I'm getting a bunch of cables out of a drawer and it's gone. They're inanimate objects.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's be accountable. Take your time, and that's quite beneficial.
And live your life more peacefully because you're not frustrated.
Yeah. I think so. Yeah. And peace is, again, it depends on how you define that. I think that for me, I found contentment in challenge. And I'm not looking, do you know what? I think I've seen it in the younger people that I work with, not necessarily the sports people, is that there's a drive towards comfort in modern society.
Yeah.
I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and the drive was for sort of material success and the sort of Ferraris and everything else. Now it seems to be about comfort.
Yeah.
I think that's a bit of a worry, because I think that to be truly happy, there is a place to be found for challenge and maybe even struggle, depends how you define it,
Yeah.
And I found that the life smells and tastes so much better after you've gone to those places.
Yeah. Well, I think you also, on a very basic level, just understand a bit more about who you are.
Oh, for sure.
And contentment comes from that. Also discontentment may come from that, because you may have to look at parts of your personality that you don't like very much.
It can be scary, that.
Then that gives you something to work on, doesn't it? And become more content. Yeah. And what would you say is your kind of, do you have an Everest? What's the thing that you would love to do in life? Perhaps you feel like you've pushed yourself hard enough.
Yeah, I don't have a sort of one definable, I want to do this or do that. I think my mind's turned to being around. And I know that sounds wishy-washy. What I mean by that is longevity. I want to maintain my quality of life and be there for the people that I love for as long as I possibly can. And that's what now drives my fitness goals. It's now not about the physicality or the challenge. It's about consistency.
Yeah.
And I've just about found a place. I'm a bit like you, Vicky. If I go for a run and I haven't run for 5 months, I'm still looking at my watch going, I was a 4:10. That wasn't bad. Like, what are you doing, mate?
Yeah, just chill out.
Just enjoy it.
Yeah.
And that's something that I fight against. I'm constant, do you know what? I might be able to get a sub 20 here if I carry on.
Yeah.
No, it's not about that. And so I just want to be
maybe there's a world record in here somewhere. Yeah.
I'll just have to wait till I'm 50 and get in the masters category, and then I don't know.
Yeah, we're all holding out for that, I think. What's the best compliment that you've recently received?
I got caught. Do you know what? I'm not sure it's a compliment or not, but I get called Yoda a lot.
Right.
And somebody called me Dungeon Master the other day.
Oh.
Short people that talk a lot. Generally, what I get called.
Well, I feel like the Yoda reference may be about your infinite wisdom, but I don't know about your height
and stature. I don't know.
We'll take that
you know what? I get so many positive compliments isn't the right word, but the affirmation I get from patients every day is. Do you know what? It's why I found COVID so hard. I realized to myself, why am I getting so stressed?
Yeah.
Ironically, it wasn't the money, it wasn't the income, it wasn't what's going to happen. It's because I wasn't around people.
Yeah.
And I wasn't around people who I could care for.
Yeah.
Because my worries, and I'm sure you experience this with the things that you do, when you're with other people and looking after them, it absolutely neutralizes your own fears.
Yeah.
It's so powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you're helping. You're essentially, what you do is you're getting the best out of people. You're helping people to live their best life and live to their potential and overcome challenges and all of that stuff. Thank you so much, David. One more question, what I always end on. What do you wish that I'd asked you?
Cool.
What did we not discuss that you wish we had?
We've covered an awful lot there. What haven't we discussed? I think that particularly talking about people's own welfare and the little things that they can do for themselves. I get asked very frequently, what's the key to it? And I genuinely think it's doing simple things and finding what motivates you. And that's not generic. And I often say to patients, have you got a goal in mind? Or, what do you want to do? And how do you want to get around it? I use quite commonly techniques called motivational interviewing, which is instead of me giving them instruction, which is what most people perceive my role to be, is I try and lead people on a journey towards them coming up with the solutions.
Yeah.
And if you do that, they're infinitely more powerful.
Well, and more sustainable as well.
Absolutely. And people, foster their own motivation for that. But if you find what motivates you, and that could be, an example is I got a guy and he was like, well, maybe, what, he's in his late 50s. I don't know if I want to run again. But, I kind of like the option to do that. And he said, but, my daughter comes back at Christmas and she loves running. And I said, well, it'd be amazing to just, crisp spring morning, go out and do that. She said, yeah, that's the thing. When you find what you want to do, and it's not reading that in a book.
No, that's just a deeply intrinsic thing.
Down the aisle.
Yeah.
It could be, for instance, my father's got an incurable form of cancer at the moment. And, I want to stand on the top of a mountain with him. And I want to do all I can to help him do that with me. Yeah. And that's what motivates me. Yeah. And if I needed to be 5 times as fit as I am now to do it, I'm jumping out of bed, I'm doing squats straight away. Yeah. So finding
out what makes you happy.
Yeah. And don't think that is that should be defined by anyone other than you.
Yeah. Love it. David, I can't think of a better way to finish our fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for your time.
No, it's a pleasure as always, Vicky.
I'm excited to get this recording out there and for other people to hear what you have to say. Really, really brilliant to chat. Great to reconnect with you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And we will speak soon, no doubt.
The Pin Drop podcast brings you the most intrepid chat on the podsphere. Interesting people sharing their personal formula for success, stories of personal growth, people confessing their fears and what they have learned from going to the edge. Hosted by me, Vicky Anstey, founder of We Are Intrepid. We Are Intrepid is a personal growth philosophy and an adventure experience company. Our sole purpose is to show you how to experience the truly life-enhancing effects of advantage through adversity, to understand how our fears and emotions work, and how to unlock the huge potential we all have to lead a more fulfilling and rewarding life. And maybe for you, that starts with listening to this.